Hi, Shari. Welcome to the Radical Therapist Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great you're here, and I appreciate you making the time. And you recently wrote an article titled "The War on Woke is a War on Empathy," and I don't remember where I found it, but it
Mhm.
caught my attention, and I really appreciated your take. And I wanted to know more because I just have been struck by
Mhm.
this kind of war on woke. I've had two recent experiences. One, I was at an art show of all places with this group of very diverse photographers, and I was enjoying the art. And this older woman walked by and looked at me and said, "This is all woke, this stuff." And then I was talking to another colleague about their particular agency, and I think from the board there was some idea that their clinical programming was in danger of becoming woke, and
Mhm.
yeah, and so it's just a theme and it makes no sense to me. And so I just want
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
all right. And so when you read this article, I was like, oh, I have to talk to Shari because this would be great for me and for
Mhm.
my listeners. So thank you for making the time. And I'm wondering if we could just start by, this woke has become such
Mhm.
a loaded word. And I'm wondering if you can maybe define woke for us and its history.
Yeah. Well, first thing I will say, the article I publish on Medium.
Hmm.
So the full title I think is "The War on Woke is a War on Empathy, and it's working."
And it's working. Sorry.
So
Yeah.
that's the key because this war on woke as a stand-in for empathetic understanding is working really, really well, which is to de-emphasize connection and empathetic understanding with people's issues and problems and make a space where everyone feels included. That's really, what woke has been about. I mean, woke's history goes, I don't know how far it goes back. I mean, well, here, let's do like I did an article, plain language definition, right? There is to be asleep and there is to be awake,
Right.
right? That's so we start there, and you have to say to yourself, who is vested in us being asleep? And what is the problem with being awake? Because to be awake is to be alert, to be engaged in what is happening around you. To be asleep is not. So just write on the plain language definition, who is anti awake? That's real sinister. Let's get like a sinister vibe to it. I'm anti you being awake,
Completely.
her
Yeah.
if you sleep. But then, from a kind of cultural linguistic perspective, Black culture, uses things like stay woke, or you need to be awake, or be woke. And these things actually are much older than recent times. I think they probably go back to the '60s, if not the '30s, maybe. But being alert and being engaged and knowing what was what. And so that piece of language, and then I recently read somebody saying it's got this religious definition about awakening to and understanding. So there's a lot of things there. But what people who are anti woke are using it for is empathetic understanding of difference. I don't like empathetic understanding of difference. It's upsetting to me. Or they use it as a stand-in for Black, Hispanic, LGBTQ, anything they don't like
Right.
is woke. And so it's an easy way to say I'm anti-Black without saying it.
Right.
Just say I'm anti-woke,
Right.
or I'm anti-LGBTQIA because I'm anti-woke. And the alarming speed at which this anti-awakening has been adopted by corporate, by individuals, tells you the power of rhetoric
Mm-hmm.
and how skillful some people are in their use of it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Uh, in your article, you start with the idea that empathy alone will not save us, but the lack of empathy will doom us. I was wondering if
Mhm.
you could say more about that.
Yeah, because I don't want to be, a Pollyanna. I don't want to be naive. Like empathy is not the only thing we need, right? You can have empathetic understanding and then still not do anything, right? But empathy is distinguished from sympathy, right? I think people know that. Sympathetic understanding is objective, generally like, oh, I feel bad for that. But empathy is like, oh, I feel that. And when you feel that, you are more inclined to act. You are more inclined to step in. And I think there is a real knowledge about that. And if you can break that link, then you can start to do things to people, and people are going to be less inclined to interact. And so, what I mean by that is I don't want to simplify the things that need to be done around social justice, racial justice, economic justice to just empathy. Oh, I just have empathy, that's enough. The action is required. But one key point is that a lack of empathy means it's not going to happen. So the rest of the story, and in the article, I talk about empathy being a part of the roux, like a roux that you make in New Orleans style cooking and other types of cooking, you make a roux, a base. Well, it's an important base ingredient. And if it isn't there, the odds that activity, motion, and interruption are going to happen are severely reduced. And when we look at atrocities across humanity, the lead up to most great atrocities was a de-emphasizing empathetic understanding of the target of that atrocity. And so it's without it, we're in trouble. It's not the only thing that will save us, but without it, we are perhaps doomed. Like that, without that, people go along. They go along with some of the worst things, the world has ever seen, but the lead up included a removal, a de-emphasis, a disconnection of empathetic understanding.
All right. You also take on conservative media and politicians' accusations of woke being indoctrination, and I'm hearing a lot of that lately. So I wonder if you could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this notion that the reason there was such a universal response to the murder of George Floyd was that a generation of people have been indoctrinated into woke culture. So what does that stand in? And basically what they're saying is that a generation of white people have been led to have empathetic feelings for Black people in their circumstances. And that is terrible. I mean, that's literally what they're saying. And this empathetic understanding has corrupted their children and a generation of people. And they want to cut that off and not have people feel and understand into other people's experience, such that they would protest, such, I'm in Portland, Oregon, such that, thousands would lay down on a bridge. It's so offensive. And I actually saw this clip on LinkedIn the other day, and how they go out and interview people and they have them say just wacky things, or people say wacky things. They don't know they're saying wacky things. And one lady says, yeah, in my school, they're trying to teach my kids empathy. And that's something you should teach at the home. What? Teaching little kids to be empathetic to each other is now offensive. Social emotional learning is now offensive. They're literally starting with kindergartners to indoctrinate them into hate culture, and to have kindergartners not be empathetically, if somebody has two dads, if your family doesn't believe in that, fine. But to go the next step to ostracize, punish, and harass them is that lack of empathy. And is that what you're saying you want kindergartners to do to each other? I'm just like, but essentially, yes. And so this is why primary schools and colleges are targets, because there is this belief that because they've learned about women's history, because they've learned about Black history, because they've learned about gay rights history, because they've learned these things, they're now damaged because they feel for other people. And that damage of feeling must be undone.
Yeah, right. And thank you for that. You also, in your writing, you believe, as I understand it, you believe there's utility to guilt and shame, and I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I know Brene Brown and others have talked about guilt, and people, here's the thing, and I had somebody. I was doing consulting. Somebody said this to me. My kids were shamed in school, and they came home and asked if our family had ever had slaves, and I was offended. The whole series of events is so confusing me. First of all, a country without shame and a country without empathy is a dangerous place to live, right? Because that means that people will do horrific things without care or concern, without any shame. And who wants to live in a shame-free society? First of all, shame is a natural human emotion, as you know, and that's, therapists and psychologists know it's a natural human emotion. The what I try to tell people, there's a difference between feeling shamed and being shamed. And we as a society can't figure out where that line is. If I say to you, you're a horrible person because you're white, and if you weren't white and so terrible and dumb, that's shaming you. But if I learn about something bad and I feel bad about it and I feel shame about it, it's going to spur me to want to, in the future, make sure either I don't do it personally or the society I live in doesn't do it, right?
Mm.
So shame and guilt have value, but empathy is not guilt. It's not shame. And the two get conflated in this desire to pull back any kind of emotional connection between people. And ironically, we've been doing this for 400 years. I take a small digression. I'm writing a book right now about race in the workplace called Competency Checking for HarperCollins that hopefully will be out at the end of 2024, early 2025. But in the book, I talk about Bacon's Rebellion, which is a rebellion in 1676 in Virginia. And a group of white folks, Nathaniel Bacon, it's a long story, and he's not a good guy. But anyway, he brings together a multiracial group of people. They burn down Jamestown, Virginia. They're very successful. And the concern from the landowners after that was, hey, we got this multiracial group of people. This is really a problem. We need to separate that. How do we separate that? And this is when our earliest definitions of Black and white come into being, right? Because previous to this time and a little earlier, there were no white people. There were British, Protestants, Catholics, baker, whatever your job. People didn't call themselves white, and not as a race. But the foundations of race start to come up to separate us. So we can't have that connection, that empathetic understanding. So once again, these ideas of guilt and shame and empathy are being dislodged, right? So we can't have that empathetic understanding. There's this constant push against keeping people across differences from actually getting over the curtain or over the wall to see that the connections are the same. And guilt and shame are valuable parts. In my life, I've done things I'm guilty of and I'm ashamed of, and that's okay. Because otherwise, I think I'd be a sociopath, And so, do we want a sociopathic country, or what are we saying? Feeling something seems to be the problem. If my children go to school and feel anything about the fact that the United States enslaved Black people, discriminated against women, and that LGBTQI people are human beings, if they feel anything about that, that's making them feel bad, and we must stop it. Yeah, I don't understand that now, and so I do distinguish between being shamed and feeling shame and guilt, because feeling shame and guilt is a natural human emotion designed to spur us to reflect on what we've done and hopefully not do it again because we don't like that feeling. It's just part of the human condition, And so this idea that and what's fascinating to me is in these conversations, especially around education, no one ever considers what Black children, what LGBTQI children, what children who have different families feel, the guilt and shame, or not even guilt and shame, the bullying and terror they felt in school and education the entire time. Like, there are no laws against that, but white children or straight children or anybody's families around religion feeling anything for somebody, that we have to stop. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to say, as somebody who practices Buddhism, the Buddha actually said that shame is a bright light, right? And
yeah, I mean, but then this goes back to darkness, right? Sleep. There are people who want us to go back to sleep, to extinguish light, and that's exactly what this alternative vision is.
Yeah, thank you. You write that the cardinal sin of wokeness is that those who until very recently have been excluded from participating in the evolution of how language refers to them, asserting their right to name themselves. I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Yeah, that was in response to an article, I think it was in the Atlantic, where this guy wrote, and he was just like, it's like, to me, the whole vibe was get off my lawn, kids, curmudgeon. complaining about, they, them, and DEI language. And,
Mm-hmm.
this is just ridiculous. Every day they're changing language, and this isn't how language evolve. A language evolves slowly with an agreed upon principles and community. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? First of all, that is not how generally language has evolved. And if that's the case, then for the majority and until, let's say, the 1960 civil rights legislation, Black people were totally excluded from participation then in the evolution of language. Women, for most of the time, were excluded. So, what society, what group naturally developed language? And then we've already done wholesale change of language. We just don't think of it that way. I live in Oregon again, and Mount Hood is actually named Wyeast. It's a name, a Native American name. We just went around changing the names of mountains, rivers, streams, cities, towns. I mean, I'm totally confused. And I don't think anybody agreed on that. As a society, we have a tendency to get shocked and offended when those who shouldn't, there's this feeling like they shouldn't be dictating. But who is dictating? Because that then means you do have a sense that somebody dictates. The idea that language developed organically and over time is in one sense true, but in an exclusive environment with only a certain group of people having any say over it. Okay. And then on the flip side, there are huge elements that developed, overnight, literally overnight. Renaming things that happened too. And the biggest change of language was the creation of the terms Black and white as races. That was made up, literally made up out of whole cloth. So it's rich to say that people wanting to be they, them, or the kind of tweaking and evolutionary tweaking that continues to happen is somehow offensive and outrageous when you outrageously defined human beings based on the color of their skin and created an entire industry of based on made up words.
Yeah.
So, I find it not credible.
Right. Thank you. In your article, you detail how what gets called woke policies have had and continue to have a transformative impact on those for whom the systems was not originally designated to accommodate, including conservatives who now oppose these policies. And I wonder if you could say more about that.
Yeah, that is the craziest, wildest thing about all this, right? Is that if you really break it down and look at, some of the people, well, first of all of us have benefited from quote unquote woke policies, right? And it's because we don't know that, because we're not taught that. See, there's another way we could teach the story that would make us feel included, right? In other words, civil rights legislation didn't just help Black people, it helped white women tremendously, right? But you have a cadre of super conservative white women who are anti-affirmative action, anti-choice, anti all these things, and yet they benefited from all these things. Like without these things, they would not be in the positions they are in. There's this peculiar irony there. And, white men, I have a lot of white men say, well, none of these things help me. Well, is that true? Because first of all, age discrimination is going to happen to you. So it gives you tools to fight that. Men's ability to participate in the emotional lives of their children and physical lives of their children was transformed by the women's movement. And some people, it made men less manly. Did it? It gave men the opportunity to make choices that a rigid patriarchal white male system did not allow. It opened the door for the fact that, hey, not everybody's straight, and running around pretending and getting married and pretending to be straight, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s is destructive to everybody, right? And in particular, honing in on people like Nikki Haley, right? Who is a woman of South Asian descent, who's barely talks about race, and her own story is totally informed by it and the reaction to the fight for civil rights, right? Her family immigrates to the United States after I believe it is the 65 Immigration and Naturalization Act that allowed more South Asians into the United States, right? Without that, she doesn't even get here. Then her father, the first job he gets is at an all-Black institution, HBCU, historically Black college, because the United States refused to educate Black people. That's not made up, And so there you go. Or there you have Greg Abbott, who is, many people don't even really know this, who is lives with a disability, uses a wheelchair, has since I think his late 20s or early 30s after an accident, a tree branch fell on him, just this really crazy accident. And he is, so hateful of woke policies. But when he was born, which was in the 50s, if he had the very same accident and was his age, he would never have been the governor. And his opportunities, the way people talked about him, spoke about him, would have been vastly different than what he encountered in the 80s and 90s, right? As a result of the work of disability advocates. Mm-hmm. And then he also benefited from tort litigation, where he got a major settlement for that accident. And a lot of people don't know this, that pays him 6 figures for his lifetime. I mean, but he quote, reformed in Texas your ability to sue for these issues that has actually limited everyday people who cannot get the benefits he's received. Or my favorite is Ron DeSantis, whose family is, origin story is Southern Italians, who faced extreme race-based discrimination in the United States. That's exactly what it was, because they were seen as suspect racially mixed people. And this you can find in the New York Times, you can read it in articles, you can see the whole layout, and up to and including lynchings, right? But who benefited from the bestowing of the idea of whiteness. So they benefited from that because they're trying to get into that. And who also benefited from civil rights legislation around housing discrimination, employment discrimination. Because a lot of people don't know, I used to be a practicing lawyer, law firms were segregated by religion up until the 70s. So Catholic law firms they're Catholic law firms. Protestant, you didn't work at a Protestant law firm if you were Jewish, and you certainly didn't work there if you were Italian, right? And when we look at little Italies around the country, we're like, oh, this cute little place to visit. These were intentional ghettos that really only opened up a bit post-World War II, but they actually then transitioned into suburban ghettos, in a sense, of suburban areas where people still went by ethnicity. And then post-civil rights, we see the whole landscape open up and people really blend fully into society. If we told that story, we would each see our part in it, and we would each see the value, and we would each see our obligation and connection to each other. But we tell a different story that pits us against each other. And and really in the case of Ron DeSantis, you have a situation where in order to join this white class, a lot of people who were early ethnically excluded are like whiter than the Protestants. They're more racist, more angry, more like they got to prove their bona fides more than anybody to be a part of this group, as opposed to saying, wait a minute, look at all these values and the value that has been bestowed by moving these conversations forward and moving legislation forward. And so it's the strangest thing, and there's almost no Republican who you couldn't really do that same kind of look back at. Sarah Sanders. Yeah, Sarah Sanders, who's a white woman, the governor of Arkansas, I think it is.
Yeah.
When she was born, women in Arkansas's condition was horrendous, outrageously desperate and dire for most women, white women in Arkansas. And the changes brought by Roe v. Wade, birth control, ERA, and affirmative action transformed the lives of women. Transformed them. Women could not get their own checking account in the 70s, right? To women can be a vice president. That's the story. It's not the story against, oh, this is against me and it prevents it. That's actually not the story. So yeah, it's fascinating. And I don't know why more people don't do that analysis and not let people skate on these conversations.
Right. Yeah, and I think politicians, we need to have that argument more. That was beautiful. Thank you. This week I read that billionaire entrepreneur Mark Cuban, who's on TV and all that, said, "Call me woke. You don't need to call it DEI. You can call it whatever you want. I call it good business." And he went on to say, it means talking to the people that you're selling to and making sure your workforce looks like them and making sure you can reflect their values and being able to connect to that. That's what works for me. And I'm wondering, you did bring up that this is a lot of rhetoric, right? And I'm wondering, how do we reclaim the narrative around woke and push back against the growing anti-LGBTQIA legislation and the anti-DEI efforts, et cetera? I know it's a big question, but
Mhm.
how do we push back against that narrative, against that rhetoric that's
Mhm. I think that I love what Mark Cuban said because I think from a business perspective that there's definitely value there. I mean, you have these businesses just lurching and unclear what they're supposed to be doing. So what you're saying is, hey, I'm gonna not care about a huge portion of the consumer group. And they're saying, oh, well, what's interesting and what's odd is you can have one person complain about a book in Florida and get it banned, but millions of people can say they don't think we should have weapons of mass destruction on the street and nothing happens. I mean, it's weird. So there definitely seems to be more weight given to people who dislike than people who like. So that means that people who are for things have to come together in very large numbers. They have to make their voices known. And I think we've been caught on our back foot.
agreed?
I think there's been this incredibly well organized, well funded march that honestly has been going on since the last major piece of civil rights legislation in 68 was passed to undo everything that came out of that and movement. So this has been a long game effort that has been able to move swiftly because it was just waiting for its opportunity to get on the ground. And so I feel like one thing is that groups, people who believe in values of openness and empathy and connection have to come together in larger numbers. I mean, apparently it takes 3,000 of those who feel that way to go up against one person who dislikes something, apparently.
Mhm.
And so they need to do that. I think in businesses have to be held accountable. I think in our work lives and even in our day-to-day lives, we have to use, inquisitive conversation and open questioning techniques with people when they say these things to us to say, well, first of all, can you tell me what do you mean by that? Or you can say, here's the thing. I understand what I hear that you have this point of view, but to me, the alternative is being asleep and not knowing about other people or understanding where they're coming from. And that's not something I'm interested in, you know, or, in the business setting, hey, our policies here are about inclusion and we are not going to create a hostile work environment, which could get us in legal trouble for people to calling them woke and using it as a stand-in for hiring and promotions. And we're not going to let you bully other people. What's interesting to me in the workplace is that there are all kinds of rules and regulations at work, right? That you can't opt out of. There's a ton of them. Let's say you work somewhere that has safety regulations, like you got to follow them or you get fired because but somehow the ideas around how we're going to work together, how we're going to respect each other are optional. And I'm always confused about that. Why companies allow the smallest voice, and literally it could be in a company of 10,000, 10 people complain and they freak out and switch all their policies. And I'm just like, would you do that on safety regulations? I mean, I'm just so confused about that. And so I think we have to push back by saying, I believe in empathetic understanding and openness and connection. And so and to me, anti-woke is anti that. And I disagree with you. Or, what do you mean looking at an art show? What's woke about it? Well, it's
Right.
all these people of color. So do you think Black people or Hispanic people shouldn't be represented? I mean, I push people through their thought process on day to day. Companies have to, I think, as Mark Cuban said, recognize, look, this is a diverse consumer marketplace that's getting more diverse, smaller, homogenous look. And you can't just say you're going to ignore 50, well, actually now 60% of the consumer market. You're just gonna say, I'm just gonna ignore them. I'm just gonna have this leave it to beaver vision of white male Christianity, and those are the only people who matter. Like that's wild, and it's not a good business strategy. But I think what we have to do is present an alternative vision. I think we have to call it out. We have to call out the derogatory nature of it, and call it a slur, because it is a slur in a lot of ways. It's just a cover for other slurs, and say, hey, that's not something I'm not participating in that kind of derogatory conversation. If you want to talk to me specifically about what your problem is, but I'm not. We have to take that power and we have to reclaim it. I don't want, and what bothers me and worries me is people who claim to believe in these principles are also adopting anti-woke language. And I really, I just, it's super worrisome.
Yeah. So, on the personal level, how do we all stay woke?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we stay woke by staying engaged. We stay woke by not getting defeated when things don't work. I mean, I think this is more of an issue for people for whom coming to these issues are new. I think people who got activated during George Floyd and then they were like, oh, I'm feeling reticent because of homeless issues or police issues or violence issues. This is the ebb and flow of life.
Mm.
And we can't say, let me just say from my perspective, as a Black person, I don't really have an option to opt out, right?
Right.
It's my everyday life. These
Right.
are life and death matters for me. And so staying woke is the nature. And this is why maybe this philosophical concept comes from the Black community. We have to stay awake. We cannot be sleeping, because if we are sleeping, that means things could be happening around us that are really critical or dangerous to
Right.
our life, right? And so I think one way to stay woke is to recognize this is a mission critical for your life, the lives of your children, the lives of our society, to stay engaged. So we can stay woke by staying open, by continuing to build those empathetic bridges, by learning, by recognizing a setback or a pushback shouldn't be the end of your journey. I think this happens to a lot of white people in particular when, they might encounter somebody says, oh, I don't like what you say that, or I feel what you're doing is racist. I can't be racist. I'm woke. Look, we all live in this stew, this fog
Yes.
of racist culture. Every one of us, all of us, Black, Hispanic, white, Asian, we have, look at Peter Thiel. He's gay and he funds anti-gay hateful initiatives. I mean, we all are in the stew, right? So it's okay. Calm down. You may get called out about some issues. I may get called out about some issues. That's okay. And that can lead to understanding, just like anything else in life. It's funny, and this is the other thing. I don't, there are very few things we do in life where we expect we're going to learn it, be good at it, never be questioned again. There's
Right.
like nothing. I mean, it takes, I don't know how many years to learn to play piano or an instrument, or what they say it takes a decade to learn your job really well. But when it comes to race or gender or issues around LGBTQIA, there's this thing like, well, I thought I had it. Why? What in your life do you learn that fast and then it's nothing else to know? I mean, I'm just unclear on why the expectation is that this knowledge should come without any difficulty or change or complexity. You get what I'm saying? Like
Okay.
there's nothing else we do that we expect that from. But even in companies, they're like, we did diversity initiative. Why didn't everything change? Are you shitting me? 400 years of policy practice and laws would change because of the afternoon training? I'm just super confused. And it's the same in our personal lives. I was at protests, I did this and that, and now people are accusing me because I didn't say they, them. And so now I hate all diversity. Like, seriously?
Mm.
What else do you do that with? Nothing. Because this is so, get rid of this expectation of perfection in this process and this expectation that it's a one and done, or that any pushback is, I'm just out, I'm going to retreat back to the comfort of certainty of hatred. Continue to learn and push and be open and be okay with, stumbling, and learning, because it takes a decade to learn a job. I would assume, especially if these things are new to you, especially if you never really considered them, it's going to take you more than a year, more than a month, more than a book to understand what has been withheld from you, which in fact you should have learned. all your life, but you did not get to, you know.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm now at my last question. I like to ask this of all my guests, but so what books, films, ideas, thinkers are capturing your attention these days?
Wow. Well, there's a really good book. It's been out a while that I love, called Minor Feelings: An Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Park Hong. Excellent, excellent book. I just feel it's like one of the best books written in modern times about Asian experience in the United States, making the distinction about this very large group, how one woman sees race through the lens of her family and background. And it's really, really good. Um, there is a book called Dying of Whiteness, and I don't know the author's name, but I listened to it on audiobook, which is also really good about it's looking at two things, which is gun culture and healthcare in the United States, and the concept of whiteness and requirement of total allegiance to it, that how it harms white people.
Mhm.
So it's really not through the lens of Black people or Asian or Hispanic people, but really how is this allegiance to this idea harming white people around gun culture and healthcare? And one really interesting quote from that book was, he was having a conversation with a guy about Obamacare when it first came out, which derogatorily was called Obamacare, which if you go all the way back to the 90s, the Affordable Care Act looks just like the elements of the program that conservatives wanted then, but we never talked about that. But anyway, this man said he'd rather die than receive support from Obama or Obamacare, and he died. So, I mean, when whiteness as a concept was more valuable than your life, it's interesting. So that is a really interesting book. There's a book that I was reading about a story that I didn't even know called Master Slave Husband Wife, about a husband and wife who escaped from slavery, during slavery, and the wife was very light skinned and she masqueraded as a white man for them to escape. And it's just such a master slave husband wife is such a fascinating story. And it seems like something we could have learned in history. It seems like we could have had a movie about it already. It's like really daring escape and you know, that kind of thing. And then there's Myth America, which is about the myths that we tell, which is really, really interesting. And it covers, again, while it is not squarely about race, it covers some of these myths that I was talking about. You know, some of the ways in which we think about ourselves, and it covers, let's see here, it talks about founding myths, the myths that Native Americans have vanished. Talks about the myth of socialism, the myth of the magic of the marketplace, the myth of Confederate monuments, which is, you know, this myth that they're there to honor the Civil War, when in fact most of them came about in the 60s, and after
more recently.
and after Reconstruction, as a way to terrorize Black people. Like that's actually why they were there, and that's what they've been doing the whole time. So anyway, those are a couple of things that.
That's a wonderful list. And one more
Oh,
question.
and one more, sorry. Just Action. I just got this book called Just Action. It's how to challenge segregation enacted under the color of law. So this is an action book by Richard Rothstein and his daughter Leah. And Richard Rothstein has a really great little video on Segregated by Design is the name of the video. And if you ever want to know why we don't live next to each other, why Black people don't have historical wealth, Segregated by Design is like a 17-minute video. You can find it. But I'm interested to read this book because it's about action. So we'll see what they say.
Wonderful. This is actually the last question. How do people find you if they want to, you know, reach out or?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's ITBOM. So I as in inside, T as in Tom, B as in boy, O as in Edward, ITBOM trainingandconsulting.com. So that's so ITBOM trainingandconsulting.com is my website. and a lot of information about me, my book, all that, ITBOM training and consulting.com. Or they can email my admin at Shari, Shari, Dunn, DUNN.com. So admin at Shari, SHARIDUNN.com.
Michelle was wonderful in setting all this up. So yeah.
Yeah. And they can learn more on ITBOM and trainingandconsulting.com about the book. Sign up for information about that and any other writings that I do on Medium, or I'm thinking about doing a Substack. So we'll see about how that goes in conjunction with writing the book. So yeah.
Great. Shari, thank you. And I'd love to have you back when the book comes out too.
Yeah,
So,
sure. Yeah.
be excited for that. And I just want to say thank you again for all of this and making the time. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always interested in talking, as you can tell. I love to talk.
Thanks, Shari.
Thank you.